Hi, welcome to Why These Notes. Today I'm going to talk about the three kinds of motion between chords. If you haven't watched the first episode, writing music for pop songs, I encourage you to watch it. If you know sort of basic music theory, that chords are stacked thirds and the different functions of the tonic, dominant, and subdominant, I encourage you to go back and watch that video. Or rather, you can watch this video without having watched the previous video. Just to briefly recap, a chord is made up of stacked thirds. A third can be either major or minor. Major means larger, and there's a larger distance between these notes than these notes. Your typical chord is made up of a major third and a minor third. If the major third is on the bottom, it's known as a major chord. If the minor third is on the bottom, it's known as a minor chord. So it's a major third and a minor third, or a minor third and a major third. We can extend this out by adding a third on top of the fifth, known as a seventh. This is a major seventh chord. This is a minor seventh chord. You'll also notice that I'm playing every other note in the scale here, and then by moving here I've played all of the other notes, and jazz musicians really like this because it gives them a lot of options for when they're improvising above a song. So there are only three kinds of motion between chords, and I'm going to use this tonic and this tonic to demonstrate. There's movement by seconds, there's movement by thirds, right? You can go up a third or down a third, and there's movement by fourths, up a fourth and down a fourth. And there's the only three kinds of motion between chords, right? You could argue that you can move a sixth. I would say that a sixth is simply an inverted third. So let's discuss these in a little bit more depth. Starting with the one chord, a third above it, right? This is movement by thirds, gives us the three chord. The one chord, as we know, has a tonic function. The three chord, by the way, is known as the mediant, M-E-D-I-A-N-T. And I think it's called the mediant because it's midway between the one chord and the fifth chord, so it sort of mediates between them. You'll also notice that going from the one chords to the three chord, you go from major to minor. And this is not a mistake. This is not a coincidence. This is sort of, a function of the way music works. Because a chord is a major third and a minor third, if we remove this and add a note above it, the major third that was on the bottom goes away, and the minor third that was on the top becomes the bottom of the next chord, and so on. So it's not a coincidence that when we're moving by thirds, we move from major to minor to major to minor. So the next chord above the third is the 5 chord, which has a dominant function. And the next chord above that is the diminished chord on the 7th scale degree, which also has a dominant function. You may recall from the previous episode that the 5 chord is dissonant to the 1 chord, right? It's got these two notes that are dissonant to this note. And this dissonance drives the music towards the 1 chord. Well, the 7 chord that we build on the 5th scale degree is known as a dominant 7th. And not only does it have these notes that are dissonant to the 1, it has this bit in it, which is a minor third plus a minor third, giving us a diminished 5th, right? If the 5th that wants to be here is lowered by 1/2 step, it's called a diminished 5th. And this gives us the interval of the tritone, which is the most dissonant interval we have. In fact, the Catholic Church outlawed this interval during the Middle Ages. Fun fact. So the diminished chord on the 7th scale degree has all of the dissonances of a 5 chord. It's just missing the 5, leading some people to call this chord a bottomless 5 chord. So they're saying this chord is really this chord, but without that note. So the 7th chord has a definite dominant property. Moving down, we find the 6th chord, which is the submediant, the same way the 4 chord is the subdominant. This is also the relative minor of the tonic, which has its own very important function that I don't have time to discuss today. I'll discuss it in a later episode. Going down again, we get the 4 chord, which has a subdominant property. It's S. Subdominant property. And going down again, we have the 2 chord, which also has a subdominant property. So you can see that by moving through thirds, we either push towards a dominant, or towards a subdominant, or from a subdominant towards a tonic, or from a dominant towards a tonic, through this softened mediant function, right? So it's a sort of softened motion. So if the 5 chord here is pretty dramatic, this 5-1 motion, softening it through the mediant chord sort of takes away some of its power. It softens it. So moving through the mediant or submediant softens the motion a little bit. So the next kind of motion is motion by seconds. I'll put that here. And I can go up to the 2 chord or down to the diminished chord on the 7th scale degree. So I have a tonic and a subdominant and a dominant. So just by moving from here to here or here to here, I've already discovered a subdominant and a dominant. It's very, very quickly. And I'm not going to expand this out further, but clearly you could expand it out further if you wanted to. Let's go ahead and talk about movement by fifths. So if I start on the tonic, I can go up to the 5th, which has a dominant function, or I can go down to the 4th, which has a subdominant function. So this is sort of our prototypical rock and roll, chord progression. Nice 1-4-5 chord progression. We can keep going beyond the 5th, and we would get the 2nd, which has a subdominant function. Above this, we would have the 6th, which would have a submediant function, and then above this we would have the 3rd, which would have the mediant function. The 2nd is very popular in jazz music as an alternate to the 4th, and the reason is that whatever it is that drives the 5th towards the tonic, which we've already discussed, exists a little bit in the 2nd. The 2nd is known as the 5th of the 5th. So if this is the 5th, this is the 5th above the 5th, right? This is the 5th. This is the 5th above the 5th, which is the 2nd. So by moving this way, we get this real feeling of progress that there's this inevitability towards this motion. The same way the 5 drives towards the 1, the 2 kind of drives a little bit towards the 5. And this is known as the cycle of fifths, and you've probably heard of it. This is what people are talking about when they're talking about motion through the cycle of fifths. And then here we have the submediant function, mediant function up here. So this chord progression is a really nice way to get through the different kinds of chord functions in this sort of inevitable feeling that this chord inevitably moves towards this one and so on, because each one is a fifth above, and a little bit of what drives the fifth towards the tonic exists to drive this towards this. So these are the three different kinds of way we can move through a chord progression, either by fourths and fifths, or by seconds, or by thirds. An interesting thing happens though, and you may not have spotted this. You'll notice that the tonic, when you move immediately to the side, you find the subdominant and dominant functions. And if we move by fourths or fifths, we have subdominant and dominant functions. So I could put my one chord here again and just sort of flip this around, and we'll put our 4 chord up here and our 5 chord down here, and we have our dominant and subdominant functions nicely matched up with the motion by seconds. And this is not a coincidence. The second is the substitute for the fourth, and the 7th scale degree chord is a substitute for the fifth, and they are a third apart. So movement by seconds and movement by fourths are actually related, and this is quite clear if we actually just sit at the keyboard and do this. Here's the 1, here's the 4, and simply by adding this note down here, we're on the second. So this movement by fourths is closely related to this movement by seconds. And the same if I go to the diminished chord on the 7th scale degree, just by adding this note down here, I'm on the 5th. Or if I move from the 1 to the 5, simply by adding this note up here, I have the diminished chord on the 7th scale degree. So movement by seconds and movement by fifths isn't very different. And if we think back to our jazz 7th chords, this is kind of obvious, right? This chord is a 4 chord and a 2 chord. This chord is a 5 chord and a diminished chord on the 7th scale degree. So really, when you're thinking about music, instead of thinking what chord should come next and going, well, there's 7 possible chords, I'm on this chord right now, which chord could I possibly go to next? Think about what harmonic function you want to happen next, and you'll have sort of fewer choices to make, because there are only a handful of harmonic functions, and there's only a handful of ways to get there. So you can have your nice 5-1 chord progression, but you can also have this smoother, because fewer notes change, 7-1 chord progression. Or you can take this 5-1 and soften it through the third. There's a concept in classical music and jazz music called voice leading that rock and roll music sort of ignores, right? So a rock chord progression will be with these big leaps between chords. And if you imagine people actually singing these things, why would I have this guy go all the way up here, and this guy go all the way up here, and this guy go all the way up here, when, this is our chord. Sorry. This is our 1 chord, and this is our 4 chord. Why not take this guy and move it down here for our 4 chord? This is known as an inversion, when this is the root of the chord. And if I take an upper note and put it below, it's called an inversion. It's not something you really need to know, but this concept is kind of cool. Then, to get from the 1 chord to the 4 chord, I'm not moving all of the notes, and I'm not moving them by a large degree. I'm just moving a couple of the notes a little bit. And it's a much smoother movement. This is sort of what I'm getting at with this idea that movement by seconds and movement by fourths or fifths is related. And this is sort of the level that jazz players think on. They don't think in terms of the 1 chord, the 5 chord, the 4 chord. They think, what's a dominant, what's a subdominant, and how do I, if I'm on a subdominant function right now, what's the next place I'm going? Am I going to a dominant function? And then they'll just choose which dominant chord they want to go to, or if they want, or subdominant, they'll choose what subdominant chord they want to go to. And it allows them to move around less. They're taking less big leaps. They're taking smaller leaps, and that allows them to come up with clever ways to move the individual voices within the chord around. So it's something sort of that's worth thinking about. So to sum up, I'm running out of time. There are only 3 kinds of movement. There's movement by thirds, which is softened through the submediant and mediant functions. There's movement by seconds, which is related to movement by fourths or movement by fifths, which, fourths and fifths are sort of the same thing. They're just inverted versions of each other. And this movement by fifths is very popular in jazz music, and again, they're not taking these sort of big leaps from a 2 to a 5 to a 1, right? They're going 2, here's a 2, here's a 5, and here's a 1. And they're not moving around a lot. They're just moving the notes that are absolutely necessary to move from one place to the next. So when you're writing your song, don't think about what chord should come next. Think about what harmonic function should come next, and how do I want to get there? Do I want to get there through a big dramatic leap? Do I want to get there through a small movement by seconds? Or do I want to soften the movement through a motion of thirds? And I think this is really sort of a clever way of thinking about things. And when I, a few years ago, realized that that there are only 3 ways to move through the chord, through chords, and that movement by fourths and fifths is actually related to movement by seconds, it sort of opened up a lot of thinking for me. I'm no longer thinking, well, I'm on a 1 chord, should I go to a 4 chord? I'm thinking, I'm on a 1 chord, I want to go to a subdominant function, so I can go to a 4 chord here, right? Or I can go to a 2 chord, and suddenly I'm not thinking, like in this clumsy, big, movements. I'm thinking, what function is next? Is the subdominant function next, or is the dominant function next, which could be this works. Here, this works. So again, just think a little bit about the function of the chord that you want, rather than the chord that you want, and then how do you want to get there? Do you want it to be smooth? Do you want it to be big and dramatic? Do you want to soften the movement? And I think that'll help you a lot with your songwriting and your creativity. And it opens your mind up to a different way of doing things. It's sort of very jazz inspired. So, my name is Mark. This is Why These Notes. I'm running out of time. I hope you've learned something. If you have a question, let me know, and have a good day. Bye-bye.